We have a problem with water after God parted the waters of the sea to walk on dry land.
You say you're a traveler, just passing by. Your road has been long, your throat's parched and dry. And while on the way, you heard someone say, there's a fountain for the weary in heart that gives you drink from the river of life. Gives you drink from the river that never runs dry. Drink from the river.
So in tonight's devotional, in our final portion of Exodus, the 7th portion, we've had some problems with water, with thirst, and complaints. And so this song by Marty Goetz is so appropriate. Maybe we'll come back to this in a moment, but for now, let's just go right to the text. You know, in times of difficulty, we need to learn to drink from the river of life rather than complain that there's no water to be found. So let's look at that tonight as our devotion. I want to start with, this is Friday night, January 29th, Shabbat Shalom. This is the maftir portion of our Torah portion, B'Shelach, which I'm going to show you the outline real quick. This is what we covered so far this week, starting last Saturday night, and each night at 6. This is this. We've read every part of this parsha after we're finished this evening's portion in chapter 17. And what I want you to see is the progression. God leads us out. We carry the bones of Joseph. We camp at Pi Hacherot. God buries our enemies in the sea, and what does Israel do? They complain about their fears and their complaints. God says, move forward. He takes a huge body of water and he parts the sea, buries our enemies in water. And then in chapter 15:22, 3 days after an astounding historical water miracle, that's can't be compared in the same class of miracles. Maybe the closest thing, the flood. An astounding miracle. 3 days later, they're angry about bitter water. Maybe the bitter waters are describing the hearts of the people. And what we looked at in the last couple readings this week is that those waters, the simple response of Moses was to take some wood, a branch, and he threw it onto the water, and the waters became sweet. The branch is one of the names for Messiah. And so we see that God is saying, drink from the water, from the river of life. When you drink from the water of bitterness, the waters you're drinking become bitter. So then God does this Shabbat school lesson about how to keep Shabbat with the manna from heaven. And he has provided them the parting of the sea, buried our enemies in the sea. He's brought us to a body of water that is bitter like our own hearts. He makes it sweet. He's providing river of life. Not to mention, in chapter 16, when we came to Elim, right around the corner, there was 12 pools of water and 70 palms. It was an oasis right in front of us. And it's like the little kids saying, are we there yet? We're saying, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And the destination is just around the corner. God gives them manna. And then in chapter 17, as if they didn't learn some lessons about water, we read our portion tonight. So what do we do in a pandemic? What do we do when things aren't going the way we like? When we hear bad news every day? When we hear horrific news, someone we love passed away, a friend of someone they loved passed away. We have to resist the bitterness of the days we're living in and pause and think that God is still sovereignly in charge of our lives. And so let's look at our portion tonight. The daily devotional through Exodus, Friday, Erev Shabbat, January 29th, Exodus 17, 1 through 16. And let's read this together. The overview is important because of what we're going to be reading here. So the whole community of the people of Israel left the Sin desert, traveling in stages as Adonai had ordered, and they camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Again, give us water to drink, they demanded. They quarreled with Moses, demanding, give us water to drink. And Moses replied, why are you picking a fight with me? Why are you testing Adonai? Let's put that into other words. You just sang the song of Moses with me. The whole nation danced in circles because God buried our enemies in water, and you want to know where the water is? Why are you talking to me? God's the provider here. God's the one who parted the sea. God's the one who buried our enemies in the sea. And now you're grumbling about water, and you're not remembering one of the greatest signs in the history of the world? Where do you remember God parting a sea and a nation walking in total on dry land across that sea and burying our enemies in it? Where's the water? Think about what you just experienced. Can God provide water in the desert? You bet he can. However, the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. Verse 3, for this is what they said, for what did you bring us up from Egypt? To kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst. And Moses cried out to Adonai, what am I to do with these people? They're ready to stone me. And Adonai answered Moshe, go on ahead of the people. Bring with the leaders of Israel. Bring them with you. Take your staff in your hand, the one you used to strike the river, and go. The river that turned to blood. 10 signs, 10 judgments against false gods, not to mention the parting of the sea. Verse 6, I will stand in front of you there on the rock in Horeb. You are to strike the rock, and water will come out of it so the people can drink from the river of life. And Moshe did this in the sight of the people, sight of the leaders of Israel. The place was named Massah, testing, and Merivah, quarreling, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested Adonai by asking, is Adonai with us or not? Keep in mind that in chapter 16, that this is at least a month after. The first part of the passage is 3 days after the parting of the sea. This is a month later. Now, they haven't lacked water for the month. They were in an oasis for a period of time, maybe even a couple of weeks or more. And now they're going toward their goal again. And there's no water. They choose men for us. Go out. Let's go to verse 8. Let's go back a little bit. Verse 7. So the place was named Massah, testing. Merivah, quarreling. They tested Adonai. Is Adonai with us or not? No explanation in the passage. I want you to see this. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Wait a minute. Where did they come from? When we grow bitter and complain against the things that God is doing, when we become impatient with God, we are possibly opening doors, inviting the enemy to attack us because we have stepped out from under his protection. Now, the text doesn't say that. But when you look at the statement that's here, it's pretty obvious that they opened the door for attack because of their bitterness. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Again, where'd they come from? And Moshe said to Joshua, choose men for us, go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with God's staff in my hand. Now that staff has become really symbolic, hasn't it, throughout this story? It's for the people to see this. So Joshua did as Moses had told him and fought with Amalek. Then Moshe, Aharon, and Hur went up on the top of the hill. And when Moshe raised his hand, Israel prevailed. But when he let it down, Amalek prevailed. However, Moshe's hands grew heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him. And he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, the one on the one side, the other on the other side, so that his hands stayed steady until sunset. Thus, Joshua defeated Amalek, putting their people to the sword. And the Maftir, verses 14, 15, and 16. Adonai said to Moshe, write this in a book to be remembered, and tell it to Joshua. I will completely blot out any memory of Amalek from under heaven. Moshe built an altar, called it Adonai Nisi. Adonai is my banner miracle, and said, because their hand was against the throne of Yah, Adonai will fight Amalek generation after generation. Wow. The text doesn't say that because of their bitterness, they opened the door to the enemy, but I think it's pretty clear. Not only did they open the door to the enemy, but God used this as a way to show them that Moses was to be respected. The staff on the hill. And it's one of the, in fact, in probably if you studied sermons of all time, this picture of Aaron and Hur holding the hands of Moses is probably the most preached sermon when it calls to having order in communities and supporting leadership. That the role of leaders isn't to bring the complaints to leaders, but the role of leaders is to hold the hands of the shepherd. Because even Moses, a human being, look at how God is showing that Moses is a man. He can't keep his arms up forever, but when his arms are up, the battle goes well. When his arms drop down, the battle gets worse. They're doing everything in their power to keep his hands up. It's a picture of human frailty of leaders, at the same time the importance of under-shepherds who are there, who hold up the hands of leaders. And when they hold up the hands of leaders, the battle goes in our favor. When the hands fall down, the battle goes against us. And so when we look at these issues of bitterness, of water, of provision, God is showing us that he is our provider. And he's reminding us that complaining, especially, think about the pandemic we're in. This is not the norm. No one in our lifetime can remember anything like this happening to the whole world for a whole year, for almost a year. What do? We keep our hands lifted up, and the people help us keep our hands lifted up. And the rest of the people in the community holding the hands of the hands, holding up the leaders' hands. We need to be together. We need to pull together. We need to stand trusting God. In a crisis, you go to war together. And the one who fights the battle is God. God is revealing himself as Redeemer, Savior, Deliverer. And he's the captain of the Lord of hosts, leading us into battle and giving us victory against our enemies. From the parting of the sea and burying our enemies in it, to the defeating of Amalek, the attack of the enemy because we allowed bitterness and strife to separate us. Let's start holding the hands up of the leaders And if you see the leaders holding the hands of the leaders, hold their hands up. And God will unite us to move toward the promises that he's given us to walk in. I pray that you'll be blessed by these words. What do you do when you face waters that have to part by the hand of God and bury our enemies? What do we do when we come to bitter waters? What do we do when we come to bitter waters? We let Messiah, the branch, make the water sweet. What do we do when we have no bread? We make praise for the provision of the manna that comes down from heaven. And then why do we complain again? The God who provided the water before will provide the water again. And when we open the doors for the enemy to attack, we hold up one another's hands. We can drink together from the river of life.
To the hopeless and gives peace to the troubled mind.
Cry out to the Lord.
Pray that the lost and the seeking can find where there's strength for the lame and there's sight for the blind.
What do we do?
They say there's a teacher from Galilee.
He's the one we have to listen to.
If you're thirsty,
Are you thirsty?
come to me. And if you believe, you will receive a fountain that flows from your heart. Drink from the river
Teach us to drink from the river of life, O Lord.
of life. Come and drink
Help us to stop complaining
and never
about the small things that you've met our needs about over and over and over. Give us these living waters, Lord. Don't let bitterness cause you to drink bitter waters, but let Messiah, the branch, heal your waters so you can drink from the river of life. Hidden Messiah in God. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you tomorrow at noon. We're going to take a sermon look at Beshelach, the parting of the sea. And let's remember what God did for us and rejoice in all that he's doing to lead us to the promised land. Amen. Shabbat Shalom b'Shem Yeshua Mashiachenu. See you at noon tomorrow. Hope you'll join us. Please encourage friends. Share. When you listen, share it with your lists so more people will be encouraged to break bitterness.